Hello, listeners, and thanks for tuning into this edition of our MetriSight podcast. I'm Beth Schultz. I'm the Vice President of Research and a Principal Analyst at Metrigy. And with me today is Diane Myers. Diane is our Senior Research Director, and she heads up our MetriCast service. She's joining me here today to talk about our 2026 CCaaS MetriRank report. Welcome, Diane.
Hi, Beth. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so Diane, before we get started, we're talking about the 2026 results. Why don't you give our listeners a quick review of our MetriRank methodology in general?
Yeah. So, for those that are new or maybe tuning back in to hear about, a MetriRank report, this is our big benchmarking report where we score and we evaluate companies across 6 different categories. The first one to even be included into these reports is market share, and it varies, based on product that we're looking at. But market share, financials, market share momentum. So how is their market share? How are they doing relative to their peers? Right? Are they growing or expanding market share, or is it contracting? We look at the product mix. We score their product capabilities, and then 2 customer categories that come out of our big studies: the customer sentiment and the customer business success.
Okay, great. And now for CCaaS MetriRank, we have something new. It's not the first MetriRank report that we're making this. We're using this in, but it's the landscape leader segment, right? Or the landscape. What are we calling it? The
Yeah,
landscape.
so it's the metric landscape.
Okay.
So let me talk a little bit about that, right? So for the folks that are familiar with our MetriRank reports, right, we rank companies from 1 to 10 or 1 to 12, however many companies we're including in the report, and that's what we've been doing now for 3-4 years now, and now we've taken it a step further in 2026 by including a visual where we are plotting companies based on 2 different scores. They're all the scores that we have, right? That we've created an axis that is the foundation score, which is the financials and the product. We have the customer score, which is the 2 customer sentiment and business success that I just mentioned. And then we look at the size of, the bubble, right? So, we put each company as a bubble based on, market share and kind of market share changes. And we plot them, right? And then we have the groupings across 3 different categories. So it's just, it's on a graphic. People will be able to see this and how we then start to look at companies. And it isn't as nice and clean. The companies that you think about is from 1 to 10, you think, oh, maybe the top 3 fit here, here, here. And that's not the case. So it's very interesting to look at. And the 3 categories are leaders, right? So those are companies that have a high foundation score, a high customer score, that how they fit. We have the challengers, which are the middle band, right? And then we have performers. So, those are the 3 kind of groupings of how we look at the companies across 2 different axes.
Who's in the report? Who can you tell us about?
Yeah, so let's start talking about the leaders, right? So I'll kind of take each of these groupings, right? So when we think about the leaders, let me start with the top 2, who are also the top 2 in our rankings, which is NICE and Genesis, right? So those are 2 companies that, anyone if you said CCaaS, who do you think is CCaaS leaders? Who kind of is head of the market? Those are 2 that are always going to come up, right? Those are 2 that are going to be mentioned, right off the bat. They're the market share leaders. They've been in the market for a long time. Genesis, particularly on the on-prem side, stalwart in that side, and definitely, a leader and growing on the CCaaS, and then obviously there's the NICE. And so those 2 kind of are standouts. And then we have the next 2 that we think about, which would be Five9 and AWS, Amazon Connect in this case. Those are the other 2 in terms of market share, right? So they're also leaders. They have different strengths and the like, but those 2 also show up in the leadership category. And then the other 2 that are maybe a little bit unexpected, or you wouldn't think, oh, they're also leaders, is Cisco and 8x8. So let me take each of those. So Cisco has the last few years done quite well in our overall rankings, in large part because their WebEx contact center, right? So that's their CCaaS service, has really been growing at a rate that is faster than the overall market, right? Or their peers. And so their market share momentum has been quite well, so that does well. Also, they're just the most financially strong company in in the top 15, and that really helps for their foundation score, right? So relatively speaking, not to say others are not financially sound other, but they just hit the high marks across the board. And they've got good solid customer input, but really it's that foundation score, right? It's the product, it's the finances that really is a standout for them as a leader. And then the other one is 8 by 8. 8 by 8 is a smaller company. They're smaller than a lot of the companies in even our challenger band. And when I say smaller, I mean smaller for their CCaaS market share, right? There's a few that are bigger, but really what stood out for them in this report and within our landscape visual is their customer scores. They did so well on the customer scoring this year that it just, it was just they are probably the one company that kind of had, before we, you start pulling all the scores in and you start calculating everything, you think of them maybe in that middle band typically and historically, but they really just had this big jump and just a big highlight because of how well their customers scored them and how well their customers are doing with the platform.
Well, that's great for 8 by 8, right?
For sure, for sure.
So that's 6 companies that found the leader space. And we ranked, how many companies did we rank overall this year?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I should have mentioned that. We did 12, right? So we always look to do 10, right? Within any of our MetriRank categories, we really strive to look at who are the top 10. For the last few years under CCaaS, we've done 12 because from like 7 to 12, from number 7 to number 12, the market shares are so close, right? That it almost is a disservice to take off the bottom two. So we do 12.
Okay. All right, great. So care to say anything else about the ranking, any of the companies, where they fall?
Yeah.
Should we just
So let me just talk a little bit about who's in our challenger bucket and then or our band and then on the performer side, let me just mention them. I won't go into depth because you can absolutely find all the details by looking at the report itself. But we have Twilio, and Twilio also is a little bit of a standout like 8 by 8. Twilio had and they're kind of almost on that border, like, gosh, just a little bit here, a little bit there would have put Twilio into the leader category. They're right on the line there. And that they had very strong customer scores also. Right. Twilio had very, very good customer input. And then the other companies that you think about that are there are TalkDesk, a long-standing CCaaS company, Content Guru, the European-based company, Sprinkler, and Vonage, right? Those 5 made up the challenger band. And then on the performer side is Dialpad. And so those are, that's the 12.
okay. All right, great. So anything that you didn't expect or really stood out to you as you did your analysis?
Well, I think the ones I mentioned, right, which was 8 by 8. And Twilio had a big jump, and they were not as high overall this year as they had been in previous years. So, I mean, they were higher this year than they had been in the last previous years. So Twilio and 8 by 8 were probably the bigger, like, oh, that's interesting this year, right? They kind of like, wow, I hadn't expected that. I wouldn't have expected that, and so there was a little bit of a change up, right, in terms of some of the rankings. Yes, market share is market share, and market share is always going to be consistent. But I think what's really interesting and what's key when we do these Metro ranks is that we can have things shifting and changing because of the customer input sometimes and the financials, right? We have companies that maybe 4 years ago, a company like a Twilio, for example, wasn't really financially strong on a lot of the metrics we look at, and they have really turned the corner on that, right? So, most of the companies in the space are, unless they're privately held and we don't have input into all of that, are really solid companies at this point. But also kind of the momentum, when we think about market share momentum and companies that are really growing and doing well, the 2 companies that stand out, I mentioned Cisco earlier, but also Dialpad. So Dialpad is in our last band, the performer band, but they had very strong market share momentum. They are definitely growing and expanding and moving on the market share front.
They're coming on strong with AI, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned how crowded the market is. What providers didn't quite make that, they didn't make that 12 cut. Who are you watching nonetheless?
Yeah, and I would say that it wouldn't, there's over 50 companies, right, in terms of CCaaS companies, and some of them are very country specific. We have some in China, we have some in Southeast Asia. So like we've got in other countries. So we definitely have some really country specific companies that are doing things, and but companies that maybe don't. I wouldn't even say just miss the mark, but companies that have the ability or they have the power to really make a big impact in this space, whether it be in the next year or in the next few years, that I think are really worth mentioning, and people would probably be remiss or wonder why we didn't mention them, would be Zoom. That would be the first one I'm going to talk about is Zoom, right? Zoom launched their CCaaS service in 2022 and it's been growing and we hear about them all the time. And, we do believe, or we do, they're right on the cusp, right? And will we see them next year? Probably in this report, right? So Zoom is one. The other would be Ring Central, right? So Ring Central had a partnership and still has a partnership, but the nice relationship was the foundation for their CCAS offering for years until 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, in 2023, they launched their own Ring CX, and that has continues to grow and be really strong for Ring Central. And we continue to hear good things and good adoption data in terms of the Ring CX. UJet's been in the market a long time. They have the close partnership with Google. They're doing some really great things on the product side. They're ones that, definitely should be on the, on a lot of companies as short lists and to look at. So UJet. And then the last two I'm going to mention are big ones, right? Big companies, Salesforce, right? So Salesforce this year in March, right, launched Agent Force Contact Center. And yeah, that has they've been doing things on AI. They've been doing, dabbling in different pieces here, but having the full Agent Force Contact Center puts them squarely in competition with some of these companies who are their partners, but also, like Avantage and Amazon. But now they're in it, and they're definitely one we're watching closely, 100%. And just the fact of their size and their scale gives them the power to really have a big impact. And lastly, Microsoft, and we are seeing Microsoft showing up, particularly with their Dynamics product more and more. They're in discussion, their name pops up all the time. We're seeing good traction there. And so I think Microsoft, in conjunction with Salesforce, and then we think about Zoom and Ring Central next year, have the ability to really be quite disruptive in this space.
It would be so interesting to see what happens. I mean, we've been talking about Microsoft around contact center for so long, and are they finally going to make a sizable dent? So we'll
And
see.
I think, yeah, we'll see. I think that they have the ability to. And I think we hear, right, they come up in more discussions and people are saying, yep, they're part of the evaluation. So if you move those POCs and you move those evaluations to real deployments, they have, that they could, be a real big threat.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you, Diane, for walking us through the 2026 CCaaS MetriRank. Before we sign off, why don't you tell us what's next for MetriCast?
Yeah, so we always have the ongoing market shares, right? So our market shares for the first half of the year, so Q2, will be coming out in August timeframe. So those will be coming up, and then also just our larger study. We published the customer experience study results, but we'll be publishing the workplace collaboration results along with the MetriStars. So those will be up before the market shares. And then I'm just gonna give another plug, right? So and then another MetriRank that we'll have coming up, which will be we're doing a combination. We're looking at CC and UC. Right. So those vendors who have that combination of a UC and a CC platform, and what does that look like? And so that's probably, to me, the more exciting new thing to keep an eye out for.
And don't forget CPaaS MetriRank, which I'm responsible for. So can't forget that one. And then also CRM, right? That'll be another new
That's right.
MetriRank
Yeah,
on our
a lot of benchmarks coming up for sure.
yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so listeners, as a reminder, you can find our CCAS MetriRank and all of our MetriRank reports on the Metrigy website at www.metrigy.com. And as always, we're happy to hear from you, so you can feel free to reach out to us, Diane or myself or anybody at Metrigy via email, just our first names at metrigy.com, or you can use the contact button on the Metrigy website Everybody, that is all for now. On behalf of Diane and the rest of the Metrigy team, goodbye till next time and take care, everybody.